Hello everyone, so in this video I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to use World Machine to make Minecraft maps. Now there are some tutorials out there, but I think a lot of them are missing a lot of the more like just kind of basic general knowledge and like how to use the different things. So I'm going to be going over all the basic stuff that I use a lot, and I'll be showing from start to finish like basic settings you need to know, and then how to import the map into World Painter. I won't be going too deep into World Painter, so I'm assuming you'll have like knowledge of how to like paint maps in World Painter and stuff like that, and add like trees if you want and stuff. But I will show you how to import the output from World Machine into World Painter. So yeah, so um again, I'll also be showing basic settings and stuff. So in this for this I'm going to be doing it in the standard version of World Machine, which is I believe it's like $120. I'm only doing this one because it looks cleaner in my opinion. But if you have the basic one, the free one, you can do all the stuff I'm doing, almost all of it. The one downside of this version is it can only do maps up to around this size, which is 1500 blocks by 1500 blocks in the game. So if you want to make larger maps, you'll have to buy the better version of it. But all the features are there, other than a few presets that are missing, which I'll get into in a few minutes. But so additionally, I think the layout of stuff looks nicer, but yeah, so in the paid version. So the first thing you're gonna need to know is a few basic settings. When you first open World Machine, you're gonna have to set this up. So the world dimensions should always, you take how many blocks you want the map to be and then multiply that by 20. So if you want it to be like a 1500 by 1500 map, multiply it by 20 and you get 30 kilometers. So you set all these to 30. Okay, same goes with here. You'd set, if currently this is set up for a 4000 or a larger map, but if you wanted it to be a 1500 by 1500, which is, by the way, the maximum size you can kind of do in the free version is 1500. So you're going to put that at 30 kilometers. Okay, the next setting you're going to need is, if you go to project setup, or here if you go to general setup, you're going to need to adjust the maximum height and then the water level. So the maximum height, again, it's 255 blocks, so you multiply that by 20 and you get 5.1 kilometers. So that's what you set the max height to. And then for the water level, again, it's 64, so you set 62, so you multiply that by 20 and you get 1.24 kilometers right here. So this is going to be your sea level and this is going to be your max height. Now, if you didn't do this, it would actually kind of still work. However, you'd have cutoffs at the top of the map when you import it. For the sea level, if you're not using any water in your map, you actually kind of don't need that. So the sea level, it only really plays a part for certain things, which I'll get into later. So if you're not planning on having a large bodies of water, you can kind of ignore that. So yeah, those are the only basic settings. Then the final thing is the build resolution. So when you make your map, you have to do what's called building it, which kind of generates everything. So I like to have it around 14.64 or less. So again, 155. If you go too high with the build resolution, the map will look bad. So additionally, you can see more details when you do it. So for here, you're just gonna want to crank that up to like 9 or 4, whatever you want. It doesn't actually matter, because as long as it's below like 20, I think usually should work. So any of these would work. It doesn't really matter. It just means it's going to take longer when you press the build button, and I'll get into that later. So I'm going to keep it at 14 for now. So yeah, so now we're going to get into the actual World Machine stuff. So World Machine is made up of these things called devices. They all do different stuff. Some of them have inputs and outputs, and the most basic thing you're going to see is what's called a height map. Now, if you click here on the 3D view, you can see the height map. So what a height map is it just tells you how high the terrain is in each part of it. So it looks like mountains or whatever. So you have a few basic uh, devices here which generate the height maps. So the first one is the Voronoi Generator, and that just kind of makes some basic like polygonal kind of mountain things. And then you have a shapes, and how the shapes works is if you go to the 3D view, you can then double click on that and you can just draw it out. So if you want I usually use the polygon. If you want a mountain there, you can then do that. You can move it around. You're going to want to click this box that says break up shapes. That'll make it more random. But I mean, it doesn't really matter since it'll get randomized anyway. So these settings don't really matter that much. You just kind of do whatever looks the best to you. You can also change the fall off distance, which is important, so you can make it wider or smaller, and that kind of will make it like less steep or more steep along the edges. So that's for the shapes. Additionally, you can add more. So say I put this over here, and then I add like another one over here. You can use any of these. I just like to use the polygon since it's very fast and easy to draw it out. So if you click on the shape, you can also adjust the maximum height. So if you want to make a more island kind of looking thing, you can set it low. If you want it to be a mountain, you can set it higher. So if you want to have multiple stuff, you can also do that. So let's just put a rectangle or whatever. So you do that, and then we'll make that one higher. So that one's at 5.1, and this one's only at 1.355 or 1.6. So now if we go into 3D view, that's what it looks like. So now we can go back. Now you don't want your map to look like this, right? This shapes is just to give you a very, very, very rough estimate of where you want stuff. Same with this. These are not finalized drawings. Some people like to use the lines. I've seen a lot of people do this. They use the lines, the path one, to kind of draw out mountains, which you can do. Personally, for me, that takes a bit. It's kind of a lot of effort to do that. You can use the randomizers later to do that like automatically. So if you want to do that, you can. But I just kind of like to just have a big kind of thing, and then I let the randomizer take care of that later. So pause for a second. One quick thing I want to add is if you're on the free version, the shapes is actually called Layout Generator. And that kind of goes for a lot of the stuff on the different versions, is depending on what version you're on, is you may have the layout of like kind of the menus is different as well. So if I go to, especially with the Perlins, so if you do a Perlin here, you see it has all this. In the other version, it's going to look a lot different like that. But you can find kind of all the same parameters. You just have to like look around for it. So now that we have a generator, you see that the output is now these height fields. So what you can do now is randomize it. So now we have a thing called an advanced Perlin, which will basically convert this into more of like a mountain looking thing. So the most important input for this is the shaping guide. That'll basically tell the randomizer where it wants to be higher and lower. And of course, what you're going to input that is your generator. So if you do that, okay, now the randomizer, so the shapes, so now the randomizer is going to output something that looks like the shape that you input, kind of, right? So it went from this to this. So if you didn't do that, it would look just random completely. So you can also do this if you want it to be completely random, but I'd highly recommend using like an initial generator since it'll end up looking better. So additionally, you can do that. So you see how here we had like a mountain here, a mountain here, a mountain here. And then when you put it there, again, there's like a mountain here and a mountain over there. It kind of converts whatever your initial height field is into more of like a randomized thing. These have a lot of settings, the advanced Perlins. I like to use these presets. One of my favorites is the Alpine Swiss one. that I believe is also not in the free version. So if you go to generator here, do an advanced Perlin, there's some other presets. You can kind of play around with them. I would start by using the presets, and then once you're kind of confident in what you're doing, you can start messing with some of this other stuff. So the main thing you're going to want to mess with is probably the feature scale, which will then, you see how you can always go into the 3D view with the box open and mess with it in here. So you see if I lower it, it becomes a lot tighter together, and then if I raise it, it becomes farther apart. You literally just want to mess with it until it looks the way you want it to look. That's kind of what I usually do in World Machine, because I find it also kind of fun to mess around, try to find new stuff to do. So I've played with a lot of these different presets as well. And then of course you can go to advanced settings. You can set the seed if you want a completely different random input. You can set the steepness, which will make it steeper or flatter. Another important one is the middle elevation that lowers or raises it. The persistence, again, makes it more flat, basically. This one kind of expands it and contracts it, similar to the feature scale. And the other ones, you can just kind of mess with it until you get it to what you want it to look like. So, yeah. So those are our main generators. So, again, and here's the thing. You can take an output wherever you want. So if you want this to be your final map, you can do that. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you can. These height fields are literally the outputs. The output of the entire thing is a height field. The whole way this works is you're just using a height field, changing it, putting it into the next thing. It changes the height field and makes it look slightly different. And then you change it again, you keep changing it, and eventually you get the height field to something you want. Additionally, you can also use height fields to do other stuff, which I'll get into later, such as these mask inputs. I'll explain what these are, and they're kind of important eventually. So now we're going to get into the next thing, which is in the natural tab. These are the three main ones I typically use. There's also a rivers. I don't really use the rivers because it's kind of easy to do it in World Painter. I typically if a river gets created in World Machine, I'll leave it and then add more rivers later. But I don't usually use the rivers. There's also snow, but that's more complex. I'll probably do another video on that eventually. But the three most important ones are erosion, thermal weathering, and coast erosion. And so here I have a kind of a demo. So here's a shape. It's just very basic kind of mountain thing. I've then taken it and added some Perlin to make it look more like a mountain. And again, this is just pretty much the Alpine Swiss preset. And then now I add an erosion. Now this is basically the default one. You can change all the settings with this, but this is just the default settings. And if you look at what this did, okay, where is it? This one. So if you look at what that did, it basically changed, it made it smoother. What erosion does is it erodes it, right? So you can change, if I increase the timing, it makes it more eroded, right? If I increase the rock hardness, it makes it more rocky because there's less, the rocks are harder to erode. If I increase the sediment carry, it'll have more flatter areas at the bottom because it's kind of showing like when you erode stuff, the sand moves to the bottom or whatever, right? So you can change all of these. Additionally, there's presets you can use. These are also in the free version. So you can do like this one. You see how there's kind of rocks everywhere. Again, you just kind of want to mess around until you find ones that look nice. So after I got the erosion, then I do the thermal weathering. And what thermal weathering does, sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't. But it's kind of like the sediment carry. I guess it kind of smooths out the bottom, which can look nice in some situations. So here's the erosion, and then here's it after. Where is it? Here we go. So here's the erosion, and then here's it after the thermal weathering. As you can see, it gets kind of smoother at the bottom, and that can look kind of cool because you have the rocks like shooting up from like kind of a smooth area. I don't know. So you just kind of decide when you want to use these and when you don't. Of course, if you don't want something, you can just delete it, move the wire. Like, you can have as many or as few of these as you want. So the final one I'm going to talk about is coast erosion. Now, what coast erosion does is it erodes wherever the water is. So this is why having your water level is important, because if you use coast erosion, then it'll erode it along the coast. That's literally what it does. So it kind of smooths out some stuff along the edges where the water is. I don't like to use coast erosion for rivers because it makes it too kind of flat along the outside. But I do like to use it for sea levels, and I can kind of show you later how you can use the mask input to decide where you want this stuff to happen. So that's our natural things. So now I'm going to get into the filters, and the filters are very important. It allows you to kind of manually adjust the terrain to how you like it, and also like do important stuff. This one I really like flow restructure, and I'll get into what that does. Terrace is also really cool. So what the filters do is they're all here. They take some height map and do something to it. They all do different stuff. So these are just the 5 that I use the most, but as you can see, there's a lot here. I suggest going through and trying all of them out, but here's the 5 that I use the most often. So first we have the terrace, and again, I have a shape here, and then a Perlin, and then a terrace. And what the terrace does is it literally adds these kind of terraces to the map. So here's it before the terrace, and here's it after the terrace. And see, before, after. It kind of splits the map into these kind of chunks. And actually, that was the wrong one. I clicked a different one. This one. It splits the map into these, I guess, chunks, and that can look really cool in certain situations, and it helps to make your mountains look more realistic. So another thing you can do with the terrace is you see how all these are really flat? They're all flat. You kind of don't want that. So if you use the terrace modulation input, then what it does is it makes the terraces not flat, but they're still there. As you can see, they're kind of waving all over the place. And the input for this, in this case, is just a default Perlin. You can change all of this, of course, and it'll change how they're wavy or whatever. And of course, you can also change how many terraces there are, the shape of them, the layering. There's all these different types of presets. Again, like, you can mess with all of this. And for usually I typically use probably not this obvious of terrorists, but like, so I'll make it like more like 20, so it's less obvious that they're there, and then like more layering. The shape, it'll be a bit lower. Again, so if you turn that up, it makes it more like a cut off, and if you turn this down, it makes it more smooth, right? So you can play with that how you want. So the next one filter I'm going to talk about is the curves. So again, we have a shapes input into a Perlin, just like before, and then we have a curves. Now what the curve is going to do is here we so as you can see, the map at the Perlin before the curve is kind of like this. What the curve did is it raised it up. So how a curve works is where this is like this half represents the low half of the map, and this represents the high map of the half of the map. So if you want your mountains to be taller at the top, you can do this. So if I mess with this when using curves, I'd recommend doing the curve while you're looking at the map, just like this in the 3D view, because it makes it easier to see what it's doing. So if I mess with this, see, now it's raising the lower parts of the map, and if I do this one, it's raising the most low parts of the map. It's just the curve allows you to raise specific heights of the map, raise or lower different specific heights. You can like pick out which height you want to adjust. So if I just want my mountains to be taller, you can just add the curve here. You can also add more points to the curve by clicking on it. So if I just want the very tall parts to be like that, then you can do that. There's all sorts of curves you can do. There's like some presets. However, for curves, I typically just make it manually since it's very, very dependent on the specific terrain. Yeah, so that's the curves. So the next one is the rescale, and the rescale allows you to change the height of the map. So again, I have the same setup as before. If I go to here and do the rescale, if I change the height, it'll just lower it. If I make it higher, it'll raise the whole thing. So it can just adjust your kind of entire map. Yeah. So that's those ones. So here now I have a few more examples of all of that combined with the erosion and natural. So here I have the same shape of Perlin, some terracing, and then I erode the terraces. So now there's kind of less terraces, but you can still kind of make them out. And then I have some thermal weathering, which again adds the kind of smoothness to the bottom. And then more curves. And the curves, again, in this case, raise the map up. So that's the weathering before the curves, and that's after the curve. And the curve in this case just looks like that, so it just raises the high part of the map. And then I have some coast erosion, which adds some erosion to the coast. Oh, and by the way, you also have to set the sea level in this. So if you look at the sea level for this, you want to set it to the same value, so 5.1 or 1.24. So 1.24, and that's what you want to set it to. And what the coast erosion will do is it'll add this kind of flattened area around it, and you can use that as a beach pretty much. So that's the coast erosion. So again, and then here's another example. So now I'm adding in a rescale, and then I also added a flow restructure, and I'll explain what that does. So, but first I'll explain this inverter. So we have a shape input, it looks like this, right? And then when you add the inverter, it inverts it. So it now looks like this. And this is obviously not going to be used for the map, but it's still a height field, and you can use it to do stuff. So then you can take this output from the inverter and then add it to this rescale, and it means that the rescale, because it's going into the mask input, it only does the rescale at these white areas of the inverter. So it means that it's going to get rescaled here, but not in the middle, if you get what that means. And of course, you could do all sorts of stuff with that. So if you want it like somewhat in the middle, then you could raise that terrain up a bit. And so what this rescale is doing is it's cutting off these kind of, you see these islands? You don't actually need to do this for your map, but this is just kind of an example of what it does, of how the mask input works. So you see all these little islands around there. After the rescale, they're gone, because I only did the rescale in that outer area. If I didn't do that, so for instance, if I remove this mask input, then what the rescale is going to do is it's going to lower the whole map, and I don't want that. I only want to lower the islands. So you can choose to only lower the outer area of it, and that's how you would do that. So then you just add the wire, and boom, it only lowers the outside of the map and doesn't really touch it. So if you look at before the rescale and then after, it doesn't really touch anything in the middle. So then the final thing is the flow restructure, and this is a very important one. I use this in pretty much nearly every map that I make, and what the flow restructure does is it basically makes it so water can drain everywhere. So sometimes when you make a map, you'll have kind of a bowl in the middle, and that's kind of unrealistic because the water has to go somewhere. So when you add the flow restructure, it kind of gets rid of it. So here you kind of have a bowl, right in this spot. There's a higher ground here, and the water would get stuck in there. So you kind of have like a lake. But I don't want that. I want the water to be able to drain. So you add the flow restructure, and it adds kind of a drain. Also, what the flow restructure can do is it can kind of add rivers if you do it on the right type of terrain. If you add a flow restructure to this shape, this outer one, So remember we had a kind of a rectangle in the middle, and we had this flat thing. If you have a shape that looks like this and you do a flow restructure on that with some mountains in the middle, it can carve out like rivers for you, and that can look pretty cool. In one of my maps that I made in one of my videos, I did that quite a bit. And that's how I kind of get natural rivers. It's with the flow restructure. And then finally, again, we have a coast erosion, but I forgot to set the height. So our final thing that I'm going to go over is this adder, combiners, and our outputs. So what the combiner does is it kind of, this one's a very specific one. So this is in combiner. If you go here and click the add one, the default is average. You're going to want to change it to add. So what that does is it literally just adds two height fields together on top of each other. So, and then the outputs, this is how you'll actually get the output that you'll import into World Painter. And then this one is just so you can view the map easily. So, so what I've done here is I've made kind of a low-level shape like that, and I've added a Perlin, which kind of flattens it, right? And these waters don't matter. They'll be like kind of covered over later. And then I've done some erosion just to make it more natural. I recommend doing all this with your islands, eroding it, just doing some basic stuff with your kind of like flat island if you choose to do it that way. And then here, I have a shape. This is the exact same step as before, and then I do all this terracing and erosion and thermal weathering. Then I curve it to make it higher. Then I rescale it to remove the little islands. And then now I'm going to add these two things together, these two. So the adder then literally just adds them. You can change the strength parameter. So if you raise this, it'll raise the mountains too high, and you see they get cut off because it hits the world height. You don't want to do that. So you want to raise it just enough so it doesn't get cut off. And that's 0.75. So, and then again, I have another flow restructure. And then finally, coast erosion. Again, I forgot to set the water level. Like, you can click that, set it to guide. I kind of forgot that. And again, what you'll see here is now there's some kind of beaches and stuff along the edge. And yeah, so now I added these two outputs. You can just, to get these double wire, you literally just put two wires to both. So this one is just a scene view. It allows you to view the whole scene at once. And this is a height output. This is how you'll actually write it to disk. So if I go here and set up my build resolution, I want it on that, and then I click build. Now it's going to go through this long process. If your map is larger, it can take upwards of like 20 minutes and like 20 gigabytes of RAM. So it can it's a very intensive process, but there's a lot of stuff in this map just because I've added random kind of examples, but that's why it's kind of building all these other ones. But it'll just slowly go through until it finishes. Okay, so now that it's done building, it only built 84% because you can see there's kind of random things here that aren't doing anything, so it won't build those. But it'll build anything that's connected to itself. So build that. It won't build that because I clicked build from here, so it'll build all this. So if you go to this output, or you can view that one, it doesn't really matter. You can see it more detail, and now you can really see the terracing in better detail. I'd highly recommend building it at a high resolution before outputting it, because you can really see what the map's actually going to look like. And of course, you also want a good resolution output, so you will want to build it at a higher resolution. So this map, I've left the terraces very obvious just so you can see them better. You may or may not want that. Of course, you can turn that down with the terrace shape and layering. But this is just a demo pretty much to see like what it does. So I've left the terraces obvious, and at this resolution you can really see it better what's going on. So yeah, you can also see all of the kind of erosion that's happening along the coast more, as well as this kind of the kind of I guess beaches that the coast erosion makes. So yeah, that's our final outputted map. So how you actually get the output from that is you go to the height output. Now what that does is it'll save it as a PNG. That's what you want to save it as. And you're going to want to just type the name, the tutorial PNG, and then close. And oh yeah, and then you have to click write to disk. And this message may come up, but it's already built, so it should only take a second. And then it'll write the file, and you're done. And that's the file you're going to want to use in World Painter, which I will get to. So there's some final tips and tricks I'd like to go over before I do that. So the first is when you're doing this, when you're drawing these two shapes out, there's some like features you can use to make it easier. So you draw this one out here, right? And then you can do something called locking the preview, and that'll make it so no matter which of these you click on, only this one will show up. Okay, so I can click on any of these different devices, but the only one that's being viewed is that one because the preview is locked. So if I go to this other shapes, which is the mountain, or sorry, not that one, this shapes. So if I go to this other one, it's now drawn. So let's delete it and I can just do it again. So you can now draw it in the middle of the first shape, and this makes sure that your second shape is lined up where you want it. So to me, so say I want another one and I only want it here. You can use this lock preview to line it up there. Of course, you can move it later and stuff, but that's just to show you how you would draw this. It just makes it a lot easier when you do it that way. So to unlock the preview, you can also do it this way. Click lock preview to unlock it, and now you can go and view any of these again. And you can lock any of them. Sometimes when you're doing the final one, you'll want to lock the scene view actually. So if you lock that, then what you can do is you can mess with any of these. So if I want to mess with the erosion, then it'll change the final one. You can see what it does at the end. So say I want to mess with this curve, or this curve here, but I want to see what it looks like at the end. Then I can do this, and you can see it changes a bit. It won't be built at full resolution because it's going to have to rebuild to do that, but you can kind of see what it does to the final map instead of just looking at the initial one. So yeah, so that's how the locked preview works. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the build button. Those are the stop it and stuff. These other views you can also use. I just like the 3D view though, since it's so versatile. Oh, this is the height map view. Or the 2D view. This will just show you kind of what the resulting image would look like. So one final thing I wanted to mention was a bit more about the mask inputs. So say I have like let's just do something random. We got an advanced Perlin and then like a Voronoi, just to make it fast. And then oh yeah, I have to unlock the preview on the other one. So here we have an advanced Perlin. So now, let's say I want to do a filter, like a curve, but I only want to do the curve in the middle section. I don't want to do it anywhere else. So connect it to the curve, and then what I can do is do another shapes. So put this there, and then in this, you can just draw like where you want it to happen. So now, I'm just gonna kind of just barely break it up because it really doesn't matter, and then put it into the mask input. Now, I kind of explained the mask input earlier for the rescale, but it works the same for everything that has a mask input. If it has a mask input, it means it's gonna do the thing, whatever the device does, it's gonna do it where the mask input is high and not do it where it's low. So I have a shape and then I do the curves, and the curve is going to be like super high. So now as you can see, this is like just an example, but you can see it only does the curve where the shape is. It doesn't do it anywhere else. So that's another way you can use the mask input. If you really need to specify um, where you want to do something, you can draw it out with the shape. And an example of where I did that was if I go to this map, um, this one I have a or no, wait, not this. I didn't do it here, but I could have done it here. So this is one of the ones where I used a flow restructure to get kind of like a river type thing, and I used uh, a coast erosion on the whole map. But say I only wanted to use the coast erosion on the bigger rivers and not on like, say I didn't want to use it here. So then I could do, so then you could do this. You lock the input here, okay? And then you add a shape, and the shape when you go into it is going to show up as this because the input's locked. Now say I only don't want to do it here. I can draw a polygon here, and then this fall off is fine, height is fine for that shape. Now that's not the actual shape we want, that's the opposite. So then I'm going to do an inverter, right? So we invert that shape into the coast erosion, and the inverter of this, now the inverter of that is going to look like this, so it means it's going to do the coast erosion everywhere except here. So if I go into the coast erosion now, it's going to ignore that one area where I didn't want the curve, and or the coast erosion. And this is especially useful for rivers. So if you have a river, sometimes the rivers are more like rivers. This is kind of more like a bay, I guess you could say. So it doesn't really apply to this case, but so here, yeah, so say it's just only going to do it everywhere except that one spot where I said no, don't do it. Okay, so yeah, that's how that mask input would work. So yeah, let's go back. Yeah, so that's kind of an explanation of the mask input. So yeah, that's it for World Machine, and now we're gonna go into World Painter. Okay, so when you start World Painter, you're gonna see this up here. This is just a blank map. That's exactly what we want. You're gonna go to File, Import New World from Heightmap. Okay, you're gonna click here, and I saved it as tutorial, so you're gonna want to open that one. So now you're gonna see your map, and you'll notice it's 2048 by 2048 blocks right here, but we wanted 1500 by 1500. So you could scale that to 75, and that'll be 1536 now, which is what we want. It won't be exactly, but it'll be close enough. What the scaling is, what this exact number is, depends on what you set this value. So if you did higher build resolution, then you'll have to scale it down farther. If you did a lower build resolution, you'll have to scale it up from say 50% to like from 100 to like 200% or something. So you just set this number so that this size is the size of the map you originally wanted, and that'll do that. So you click OK, it'll import it, and you see these weird borders. You're gonna need to get rid of those. So if we go here, you can go to this puzzle piece thing and just select all of them and click remove tiles, and that'll remove them. So, and now your map is pretty much ready to do whatever you want. Some first things to do is you just fill it with bare grass to get rid of all that, and then you just kind of color in the mountains however you want to do it. You can color it with World Machine as well, but that's a lot more advanced, and I'll probably make another video on how to do that. Because you need to do that in order to do snow as well. So if you want to use World Machine for snow, you have to color it with World Machine, and I'll do that in a separate video. But this is just for super basic height maps. If we go to our 3D view, we can see that it's literally the same map that I showed before in World Machine. So yeah, so that's pretty much it for basic World Machine use. Um, yeah, so if you have any questions or like concerns, please leave it in the comments, and I'll try to get back to you. I will do more tutorials about more specific stuff, but this is just like the most kind of basic stuff I use in almost every map that I make. Um, so yeah, thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe. And yeah, see you in the next one.